Okay, perfect. Let's start it. So yes, thank you for coming today or tuning in today to this week's webinar of creating and maintaining boundaries. My name is Jody Stewart, and I'm an intern at Clear Mind Therapy, and I'll be guiding the session for today.
Thank you so much, Jodianne, for doing this webinar. My name is Nancy Rose from Bangla. I am the director with Clear Mind Therapy. So I will go ahead and leave it to you, Jodianne, to lead and guide us with this, and then we'll connect back with the rest of the team to just kind of discuss any other details or add any pointers. So I'll leave you to it.
Okay, so let me just share my screen here. Are you able to? Are you able to see my screen?
It says you started share. There, we see it.
Oh,
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Let me just go into present. Oh, of course, this one. Beginning. I was editing in the meantime. Okay. I believe we have one person to admit. Am I okay to admit them, Nancy?
Yes, sure. As anyone joins, feel free to admit them and just welcome them as they come in, and let them know that the sessions are being recorded and
Okay. Hello, Penny. Thank you so much for coming in. We have started the webinar and it is currently recording. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see if your screen is on, but if you don't want your screen on in the session, that's completely fine. Okay, so I'll get started here. So today we'll be talking about creating and maintaining boundaries. Again, my name is Jody Ann Stewart, and I'm an intern qualified registered therapist with Clear Mind Therapy. And let's begin. So today we'll be covering the topics of personal boundaries, types of boundaries, creating boundaries, and maintaining boundaries, and what all that looks like. So when we think about boundaries, what exactly are they? Well, it's a bit different to everyone. It can either be maybe a yes, no, or maybe so, depending on the person. And it is a bit tricky to consider what our own boundaries may be. Boundaries help us understand our feelings and our stuff separate from other people, so we know how to best treat others and also how we hope for ourselves to be treated. They can help based on our own standards. It can also inform where our own rules are, our own guidelines of how we would like to move forward throughout the world. And boundaries or expectations and needs vary in different areas based on the human experience, which can help us feel safe and comfortable in relationships with our families, friends, partners, and ourselves. We usually develop boundaries in an early age, so you may already have boundaries in places for things like personal space or sharing money with close friends. However, boundaries aren't clear for everyone, so it can be quite difficult to communicate them with others. So what are boundaries? Boundaries help set standards in how we want to be treated and how we treat others, especially for how we can support and take care of ourselves. When we are able to create and maintain healthy boundaries, you can lessen feelings of anger, resentment, or even disappointment that arises when your limits have been pushed. One way to think about boundaries is a house with a yard at the front, maybe a fence around it, and you can allow people to come in, but there are rules in place that you set that you would like others to follow if they are on your property or are using items in your house. For instance, if they use your vacuum or shovel, you would want them to return them to you cleaned or in the same condition that they took it from you. Or maybe they brought a pet into your property or in your house and they dirtied up the place, so you would like them to clean it up. Now, for some people, that may be a hard or softer boundary that's different from yours. Maybe some people are okay if they get the vacuum bag dirty, or if another person's pet dirties up their place and it's not a really big deal to them. But what's an issue for them may be what's not an issue for them, sorry, may be an issue for you. And what's important is to identify what your rules are and what your rules are for you. It's not to say exactly that you'll stop being friends with that individual or you'll start kicking, screaming, rolling around on the floor if they return your vacuum in a different way than you wanted to. But it is to say that other people have their own personal rules and boundaries, are a way to communicate your rules and what you're comfortable giving to others and what you're able to give permission on. So you may be wondering, sure, I have some rules on what I like to use, but I don't know, how do I know exactly what do I need, what boundaries I need, or how do I know I even need any boundaries? So we're going to talk about boundary violations. It sounds pretty self-explanatory, but what does boundary violations exactly mean? These boundary violations can arise when we reach our limit with our rules that we set in place that have not been respected, or they also appear when we haven't set rules ourselves because maybe we didn't know the right words to say on how to set the rules. Maybe you have someone who pressures you and tries to get you to change your mind about your rules by trying to challenge them or minimize the reason you have behind the boundary that you made and make you feel guilty for it. So maybe you're feeling pressured, or maybe it's an identity crisis. If you're often thinking, who am I? And you feel unclear about your life's purpose and you struggle to set goals, it can be difficult for you to set any boundaries in your life and feel comfortable. Another area is maybe you feel that you constantly feel that you have to repeat your boundaries to someone and you feel like they don't listen to you and you have to defend or justify the reason it is that way for you because someone else has not been respecting your boundaries. Or maybe you're feeling tired often, and maybe you're feeling tired and you feel like there's no exact reason that you're able to place. Maybe you try to go above and beyond for other people, or try to fit time into your schedule to help others, even if it means that you have to delay what you need to do in the leftover time. Pushing your own wants, desires, or needs, or even never identifying what those needs are can also cause a sense of fatigue and even also make you even experience a form of mild depression. Some other signs are if you haven't been thinking about exactly boundary violations, or maybe you're feeling some discomfort, or you're expressing that you're feeling off when a specific person is around, that could indicate that those boundaries have been broken. That can be emotional boundary, a mental boundary, a physical boundary. It's possible that there was a boundary violation. You may have even been physically uncomfortable or kind of uneasy. Maybe you had an uneasy stomach, a racing heart, sweaty palms, which is your body's natural response to communicate to you that maybe you're feeling unsafe and that there has been a boundary crossed. There could even be maybe more of a mental boundary that's been broken when you feel like you're having a difficult time even thinking clearly or processing your emotions when that person's nearby. It can be quite frustrating and can cause you to avoid certain situations. Maybe you don't go out as much, or maybe you're trying to go out less if you know that specific person is invited, so you can try to avoid any type of interaction with that person. If in the event that you feel like you're being unacknowledged, when you kind of state your opinions or feelings, maybe, and even after you've communicated them, that can also be a sign of a boundary violation not being heard, or your feelings being accepted. Another area is feeling any type of fear or rejection of guilt. Maybe You have issues saying yes. Maybe it's the last piece of cake or the last cookie that's on the plate, and you're like, should maybe I take it? I don't want anyone to think a certain way about me. If I do take it, is it allowed? Am I allowed to take it? Is anyone else going to take it? Is this a scenario where you're just trying to kind of read the room to understand what maybe other people's opinions are? So maybe you hold yourself back in certain situations, or maybe you even stop yourself from saying yes in areas of, oh, I want to be a little bit more comfortable on the couch, but I feel uncomfortable asking for more space. That would also be a sense of maybe you need to set some boundaries on communicating that value or that need that you have. Another area would be some codependent behaviors, and that would be codependency where one person puts their own needs aside for someone else, and the other person would be avoiding exactly accountability for their own actions. So maybe you feel resentment for doing things for someone else, even if you volunteered it, which could be a sign of codependency because your boundaries are possibly being violated because maybe you feel like you won't be valued or liked or even loved if you were to communicate you don't like doing this action or doing this deed or favor for them. So what exact boundaries do we need? So since we're aware of some signs that may appear in us, physically, mentally, and emotionally, when we consider the type of boundaries we need, there's about 5 boundaries, which consist of emotional, material, time, mental, and physical boundaries. And this number can change on the boundaries, how the boundaries are broken down, depending on what kind of guide that you're looking at, but moreover, it does stay about the same. So when it comes to emotional boundaries, it consists of what, where, how, and how much we choose to share of our life, and how your own and emotional needs are handled, basically, as well as others' emotional needs are handled. This often develops in childhood. So if maybe there was like one unified emotion in the household, that can cause a lot of issues in personal relationships and relating to other people. In a relationship, every party can have a different emotional experience, and there can be instances where you feel like maybe your emotions are being dismissed, rejected, or they're even assuming what you feel or assuming your take on what you've shared. We can't exactly assume we know what other people think or feel, and rather we would have to hold space for them and allow for them to share their own experiences, even if it is different from how we feel. In terms of there may be situations of justifying where you feel like you have to present how you feel, kind of like you're in court and you have to say A, B, C, D is the reason why I feel the way I feel, in order for you to feel like to get your point across, for you to feel like it's valued or important. If you ever feel like you're constantly in these situations, that could be a sign that maybe these emotional boundaries have indeed been blurred. When it comes to emotional dumping, it is natural to happen in any relationship. I know there is a kind of a context around emotional dumping where it's seen as explicitly negative, but sometimes you do need to share your feelings because you are going through a rough spot. It's just that the idea of emotional dumping is that it's unrealistic and unfair to expect for others to always be emotionally available for you to share what's going on. And maybe there does need to be times where you need to communicate a boundary to state, at this time I'm not ready to talk, but maybe in the next 2 hours or maybe this weekend I would be more willing to hear more from you. And in terms for emotional boundaries, that can also include sharing inappropriate or even inappropriate emotional topics you aren't ready to discuss yet due to your comfort level on the topic itself, or even based on the relationship you have with that individual. When it comes to material boundaries, that includes areas of your possessions, even in terms of like finances, So those boundaries are treatment of our possessions and our property, finances, and that means your needs and preferences on on those items and how they can be shared. So this is about kind of when you're thinking about lending your car, your books, your clothes, and maybe you got them back dirty, maybe they came back stained. It's okay for you to say you have rules on how you like them to be returned to you and how you're comfortable sharing them and what items exactly can be shared. When we talk about time is more so relative in terms of when it comes to plans and time relative to yourself and others. So how late is it? How late am I comfortable with for me attending this event, or how comfortable am I if someone else is 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or even so on late? And if you do find yourself running into that issue consistently with the friend or the family member, that would be a time to start making those boundaries to say, I'm willing for us to have these events and have these meetings, but I would need you to show up at this time because I do have such and such plans that I need to have for myself, or this is how I what's important to me, and I would really like if you respect my time. Also, for time-related needs, that also goes for preferences of how things are handled. For example, if you have a certain expectations or no shows, like if you're not coming, just let me know. Don't kind of like ghost me and not let me know that you're not going to follow up. Or even if it's an item you would like returned, you can say, I'm willing to use this item, but I do need it back in about 2 weeks. Please have it back to me at that time. When it comes to be contacted when told not to, that also goes into the area of time for wanting to a specific amount of time to be shared with other people. That can kind of arise in friendships or even with personal, like romantic relationships. So maybe you wanted to communicate that you needed a bit of space or time to yourself, and that wasn't respected. I know there's definitely been times where I've fallen into that as well when I've been having a conflict with friends that they've said, oh, I need a bit of time, and then I just want to say, oh, but I just really want to explain myself some more. That would be kind of a sign of a boundary violation where they needed that time and space to process their feelings and process their emotions. But for me, especially experiencing that, I would be experiencing it in a different way, and maybe that would lead into my own personal worries, fears, even triggers that maybe I thought I was going to leave something in a relationship, but that would have been a personal boundary violation. And definitely it's important to hold space for individuals when they do try to communicate, they need that time for you. And when it comes to providing favors, that can also mean providing favors or even free labor. That could be friends, work, maybe you feel like you're constantly providing favors to friends or free labor partner over time. That would be a space where no's, like saying no would need to be in place so you can better focus on your own needs and well-being to make sure that things don't run over into time or like just too much into your personal life where you feel like you aren't exerting so much favors for your friends that you feel like you're kind of taking away the enjoyment from just being around them. When we think about mental boundaries, that kind of consists of preferences on how our thoughts, opinions, these values, and even conversational topics are shared and handled. Relationships that are dismissive, kind of rejecting every thought, opinion, and values. If you find that it has been consistently taking place, then it would be to set up some boundaries to shift that dynamic into something that can be personal.
Julia, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm having a difficult time hearing you. I'm not sure if everyone else is having the same issue.
Sorry. Can you hear me better now? Or is
yes.
it? Okay.
It sounds a lot clearer. Thank you so much.
Do you want me to Sorry, do you want me to review it or am I okay to just keep going? Was it like you couldn't hear me at all?
I think we were able to hear. It's just it was a little bit muffled, but I think we're okay to continue.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. And lastly, that would be physical. So that includes the physical body. So personal space, as experiences through your own senses and your own comfortability level. So your preference for respect, privacy, closeness, and touch, even in terms of public display of affection, any of the sort would fall into this category. This also does include sexual boundaries, although depending on the type of guide of a breakdown of areas of boundaries that you look at, it could be in a six section. And that would be about sexual manners and how they're talked about in terms of when, where, and how that material is presented, and how can consent related to sexual or sexually suggestive words, jokes, images, touches, and so on. So if you feel like you are being pushed in this area, it would be quite important for you to state boundaries on what you're most comfortable with and willing to talk or willing to share with others. And especially if it's in a public space or in a private space, how that changes for you and based on your own personal reasons and your own comfortability level. So now how can we create boundaries? It's important that we start slow and go at our own pace. When thinking about boundaries, sometimes we can all have a different perception on what maybe are softer boundaries, what we could be a little bit more lenient on, and what are our harder boundaries, which is our bigger no's. And there are different types of boundaries that we can have. So if there are diffuse, which are pretty low and they don't come up and they remain quite vague. We can have rigid boundaries, which can be up pretty high and we don't let them down, or they can be a bit more flexible so they can go up and down as needed. For a bit more context, rigid boundaries, we kind of set them more without sharing them intimately about maybe our feelings and needs. Maybe for rigid boundaries, they're a bit more, we may be a bit more closed off to when we set them. And it's a bit difficult, or it can be kind of impossible when all of our boundaries are quite rigid, because it can be hard for us to connect with others and have others get close to us emotionally. So this type of boundary makes it harder for others to understand our feelings and needs because we share quite little of ourselves. And for diffuse boundaries, they may be a little bit more loose. They're not exactly defined. It can be a bit more difficult in communicating or even understanding your boundaries. So maybe it's kind of in the sense of like the topic of before, maybe there's like that last item of cake on the plate and you're like, oh, maybe I should take it, maybe I shouldn't take it. It's kind of like maybe it'll go up and you'll grab it, but you have those thoughts of guilt or rejection or being seen differently in a negative manner. So the borders can be kind of foggy and clear. They're not really exactly defined because you may internalize other people's emotions or let in kind of like intrusive arrows from other people into your perception, and that can lead to feelings of shame, sadness, even resentment or frustration. The aim would try to be to have flexible boundaries, which can be difficult depending on the topic, but it's important to have flexible boundaries so it's better for us to adapt to different situations in our relationships with other people. And that's when our boundaries are more so clear, where they're healthy. We can reflect our wants, our emotions, our values, even desires, and we can also have some openness to have space for others' emotional reality and their feelings and needs. And it helps us have our relationships where we can be a safe space to discuss our thoughts and feelings and listen to others to make adjustments to fulfill the interests of both parties. With a more flexible type of boundary, it can create respect in our relationships to bring us closer together with other people and strengthen our bonds of trust. And lastly, can also prevent us from feeling too overwhelmed or frustrated, or maybe being standoffish, letting other people in, and it can make us feel more secure in our attachment with others, and more secure in ourselves. So when you're trying to understand your own boundary setting, kind of think of it in the terms of a barometer. And if you do fall into a more rigid or diffuse boundary setting, it might be best if you can find yourself moving a bit more into the center to allow for those connections to take place and to lessen those feelings of resentment or shame or even anger. So for setting healthy boundaries, it's important to start with reflecting on the why of your boundaries. So that's a time where you can become a detective, look into the reason of why this rule would be exactly important to you and how it could benefit you. Oftentimes, boundaries do arise after someone has displayed a type of behavior that we exactly didn't like. So we were trying to set a boundary so we can better improve our relationship and better improve our interaction for how we move forward. So looking into the why of maybe this boundary is important for you or why you value this boundary would be a good start in setting them in your day-to-day life. When starting with boundaries, it's good to go slow and set them up so you can build more comfortability. You can set them with start with people who you're most close to, which would be your friends, family, or even you can set up personal boundaries for yourself, which can be quite hard. But it's important to start slowly to build that comfortability. So when you set them in place with others, it can be a lot easier. To establish the boundary, it is better to have them in the beginning of relationships to already have that expectation earlier on so people know how to move forward. But in the case that that's not possible and you're wanting to set that relationship with others, that would also always go back into the why of your boundary and just using the why of the boundary or the rule, bringing that up into already set relationships as to the reason you're setting this rule and how you think it can benefit the both of you and your relationship for the future. Another step would be having some me time. So even being able to prioritize basic boundaries of maybe 2 hours to yourself, creating that in your schedule where that's something that doesn't change, doesn't move, not letting other errands lead into that or taking extra favors during that time. Having an hour or two to yourself can be really beneficial for you to slowly start implementing boundaries into your life. Another thing is boundaries can increase and decrease in certain settings. So also depending on the relationship you have with people, maybe it's important to have specific boundaries at the workplace that can make you feel more controlled and empowered, and that will look different from the boundaries you have with friends where you want to be a bit more vulnerable, a little bit more open to share your interests and your feelings. It's also important to communicate boundary violations. So there can be pushback when you do set your boundaries, and communicating those concerns can promote safety and trust in the relationship. Communicating boundaries doesn't exactly mean there is conflict or it has to go into being an argument. This would just mean you just want to clearly state, maybe you did set action. I don't really like that personally for myself because that's something I'm not okay with due to my own values, my own life experiences, and I hope moving forward we don't run into this again because I do value the relationship that we have. It's also important to keep things in perspective. So boundaries are helpful for improving our relationship with others, but it's also important to not let them control our actions, thinking, and feelings. Boundaries can definitely change over time as we grow up and have new life experiences. So maybe a boundary you had 3 years ago maybe not be similar to boundaries you have today, and maybe they've changed or maybe they've gotten stronger over time. but it's important that we allow our boundaries to be a bit more flexible so we can have a bit more openness to having those relationships with others and having new experiences. Also, another point for that would be that boundaries especially are not like a form of control or wanting others to change. Rather, it's a way for us to ask for someone to rather it's a way for us to make a request from others so they can change their behavior that we didn't like, as I mentioned before, so we can take better care of ourselves. And if the person has started to kind of like respect that, then our boundaries would change with that same individual. So boundaries are quite flexible throughout the relationship you have with people. Another point is to practice self-love. So doing good activities can also boost your internal dialogue that helps inform you what boundaries you can set or boundaries you can adapt, especially having more activities of self-love can help you find exactly what rules or what goals you want to have in your relationships you have with others and in your friendships, and can help you feel a little bit more supported and more confident in setting those rules with other people. So boundaries can support your well-being. So in terms of they can boost your self-esteem, they can help build self-respect and respect for others. They can even help work-life engagement, your social support, as well as improving your communication with other people. Now, while that is really great, and as it can be quite difficult, especially when we receive any pushback for setting our boundaries. So it can be difficult, but I do want you to remember you are still worthy of having boundaries, even if you face pushback, even if someone is trying to understand the logic behind your boundaries or trying to challenge your boundaries, you are still worthy of having them in place. And if you do find you run into any issues with setting boundaries, there is a guide you can use from DBT. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but you can definitely face pushback with people, and it can be difficult to set up those boundaries. Some reasons why it could be difficult could be maybe you're having a fear of missing out. You have that fear of perfectionism or social conditioning. Having the fear of missing out is quite consistent now. I know that we did have the pandemic, which took place, and now people are a little bit more hesitant of going out, and some people are quite excited to go out. But setting boundaries can be a bit more difficult because you feel that if you do set them, you might miss out on experiences you have with others. Maybe they won't invite you out as much, or even in terms of being hoping that if you set the boundary, maybe you might not feel like you're maybe you feel like you're not exactly being perfect, or the idea of perfect. You want it to go a specific way. The boundaries have to go this way, or if it doesn't go that way, you feel like it might go wrong. So setting boundaries can be quite difficult, either to maintain an image or to have an image maintained of yourself in other people's minds that you're hoping to achieve. And also, setting boundaries can also be difficult because of social conditioning. That can be due to gender or cultural or religious expectations. It's still important for us to advocate for ourselves, to distribute those tasks, those rules that we hope for others fairly amongst the relationships we have with other people, and take breaks to maintain our own well-being. And sorry, so as I was mentioning before, when you face pushback, it is one thing to keep in mind is Dearman. So it's a method from DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, that helps you establish boundaries. And boundaries are an invisible barrier that help us protect our well-being, our time and our energy, and saying no to things. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna bring myself down so I can read what I'm saying here. By saying no to things that no longer serve you, you can preserve your peace and conserve your vitality. So it's important to establish those boundaries, which could also mean muting or unfollowing people online as needed as well. When thinking about endearment, when you are facing, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what this is that just popped up. Can you see this on the screen?
Yep.
This,
Yes.
okay. I don't know how I brought that up.
There's a minimizing sign there. I'm not sure if that would bring it down. Above that.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank
No
you. Yeah, so if you are facing any pushback from other people, one thing you can use is Dearman. I know I'm running a little bit past the time, so I will quickly explain this for us. So one is to first describe. So describe the details on the current situation if needed and presenting the facts. So clearly state what you're responding to of the behavior that someone is sharing to you that you feel that is overcrossing your boundaries or is a boundary violation. Express your emotions and thoughts regarding that situation. Try not to presume that the other person is aware of your feelings or the boundary that you have set in place. After doing so, it's important to assert your needs clearly by asking what you want, or confidently saying no if you feel like that boundary has been pushed quite severely or quite consistently. And next stop is to reinforce. So kind of be prepared in advance by highlighting some of the positives that you hope to achieve by what you desire, saying, I'm putting this in place because this boundary in place because I find that it makes you feel uncomfortable when you do that. And I don't want that for a friendship because I really value you in my life. And I like that we have these interests or we do such and such. So I hope that by you stopping doing that, we can continue to have the friendship we have. Next would be mindfulness or mindfully. Try to state your goals and maintain your stance. Try to avoid any distractions and stick to the subject. At this moment, it's kind of meant to be like a broken record. Just state consistently what you're hoping to ask for. Maybe you find that you're trying to set this boundary with another individual and they kind of veer off into other topics, and maybe they'll say, they'll try to bring up another point or another experience that they had with another individual or another experience they even had with you. Just try to stick it back to the regular point of, I understand where you're coming from, or I understand that this may make you think about other things, but right now I just need to bring it back to this specific instant we're having, or a specific situation we're having where I feel like my boundaries are violated, and I really hope for this not to happen again within our relationship. And the next is so appear. Try your best to appear confident, efficient, and capable of employing a confident tone, assertive body language, while having good eye contact. It is best if you can try to avoid stuttering, speaking softly, looking down, or withdrawing during communication. If you do find that you have issues doing so, at that moment, it would be great for you to just be honest and share your feelings and just say, I know I might be stuttering, or I may be looking down, or I know maybe my tone is a bit different, but I want you to know that I'm genuinely upset or hurt by your actions, and that's why I'm bringing this to you. So I hope you can respect the boundary that I'm setting in place. Lastly is end negotiations, which require being prepared for any compromises, to propose or consider any alternative solutions to the issue or to the boundaries set in place. It's important for our boundaries to be flexible. So, maybe after having that discussion with your friend, family member, or partner, you can lower your demands and be open to any alternative ways to move forward, and politely decline any suggestions that you feel like don't respect your original values that you have. And if you feel like if that an alternative suggestion feels like it is still pushing your limit as well. Try to just concentrate on finding a mutually beneficial solution for the two of you. And yes, so that is the webinar for today. If you are interested more so in boundary setting, more so maintaining boundaries, if you feel like you have been able to identify your own boundaries, at Clear Mind Therapy, we are currently taking new clients. So if you are interested in therapy, you can get a free complimentary consultation. You can book that today. And currently we're running a promotion where we have one individual session free running this week. So there is still tomorrow. If you'd like to book a session, you can go check more out on the website. And I've also included this small note. I wanted to say thank you so much. A quote from Brene Brown that we can keep in mind is that boundaries are a prerequisite for compassion and empathy. We cannot connect with someone unless we're clear about where we end and they begin. If there is no autonomy between people, then there is no compassion or empathy, just enmeshment. So if you are looking to kind of get started on setting those boundaries or figuring out what rules are best for you, there is a resource I have here where you can take Dr. Martin Seligman's Values in Action inventory, and you can kind of figure out what the rules are and become your own detective and figure out the whys behind your own boundaries or behind those boundary violations you may be experiencing in your relationships. And if you do like a more visual reminder, I have included Support House's infographic as a resource you can use for creating your own boundaries as well. Thank you so much for your time. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Julian, for this webinar.
Great job.
Discussing boundaries. Yes. So you had mentioned the importance of recognizing when boundaries are being crossed, right? And also working through the rationale of why are these boundaries important to me? So like the value system, right? And that really highlights for me the moments of emotional self-awareness that's really needed in the moment when it's happening, of when you are feeling that discomfort, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes I feel that these emotions can be missed or they're overlooked, right? Like you just feel really uncomfortable and you just don't know why. So for the webinar, because these conversations really open up that awareness to the thought process that needs to happen in order to recognize, what our boundaries are, and also what needs to be done with those emotions, right? Whether it be like self-compassion or self-care, or giving ourselves grace in those moments. And then also externally. So how are we communicating to other people how we feel and what our needs are as well? So yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. And I definitely agree with that. I found even like doing the research for the webinar, I was kind of like making me go into like my own relationships and thinking about how I've been able to set boundaries, or maybe like, oh, maybe there were times I was a bit too rigid and maybe my like emotional awareness could have been a bit more open there, open here and there. So it was nice. I was also able to take the inventory and see where I can start working on that myself.
Yes, for sure. Did anybody else want to add on the team? Just kind of your views on boundaries, or maybe your takeaway, or what you would recommend or suggest for clients.
Yeah, I'll go. Really great presentation. I really loved it. I'm actually in the middle of some boundary work with one of my clients right now. So I was going to ask you, we've kind of been working at first, like identifying her values, like what she stands for and what's important to her. Then we started identifying like the problem areas in her life and what makes her feel safe, and like the distressing things that might need more work in relation to therapies versus the things that cause her to feel supported. So now it's like identified everything, we've defined everything. And now I'm kind of wondering where to go next. Like, should we be doing like scenario type boundary work and talk about different things? I was wondering if anyone had suggestions.
I think scenario work is great because it allows them to see how they can apply it in certain situations that have happened in the past or some things that might happen in the future. So I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. Even like to echo Nor, I think scenario work would be good as well, and also possibly just going into the different areas of boundaries there are and seeing how does she feel about boundaries for time compared to boundaries for emotions, and just seeing how their perspective changes among could be helpful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Jodianne,
Yes,
great
for sure.
presentation.
And
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say that I feel like a lot of people don't recognize their boundaries. So I think this was a really great way to to bring awareness to that and to not just bring awareness to what their boundaries are, but maybe if they are crossing somebody else's boundaries that they weren't necessarily aware of. So it might help them recognize, oh, maybe I'm a bit too pushy with this. Maybe I should ask them. So I think it's great. It's a great topic to discuss because I feel like it's not discussed often.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was like when I was researching, I was coming across a lot of like your boundaries are pretty invisible because it's like unless you
Yeah.
communicate it, no one else really knows until you
Mhm.
see that. So it's really up to you to hope that hopefully you're secure and feel like you kind of feel valued in the relationship so you can share those boundaries with other people. But
Yeah.
for the most part, they're pretty much invisible and no one really knows what boundary you have until you tell them that you pushed it.
And I feel like a lot of people are people pleasers, so they won't really say anything because they don't want to come off as rude or anything. So it's important to know that it's not about being, the best people pleaser, but just knowing how that these stopping these boundaries will make you a better person in the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
yes, for sure. Thank you for the input. Um, just to kind of add to that, you know, also exploring, as you mentioned, there's circumstances where there's pushback and people don't respect your boundaries, right? And I think it really highlights that idea that, the boundaries are really for us and it's not for other people, right? There's this, I think, like a notion that, when you set a boundary, this is what I don't like, and you kind of have that expectation that other people need to respect your boundary, right? And the reality is that not everyone may respect the boundary or agree with your boundary, or they may not even be able to um, fulfill that particular need, right? So I think there's also that to consider, that okay, well then how do I respect my own boundary in this case? Do I need to remove myself? Do I need to limit the conversations that have to do with X, Y, and Z, right, with this particular individual? So boundaries also help us navigate um, the challenges that we have in different relationships.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, Nancy. Because even when I was doing research, it was a lot of they're saying like boundaries online has been kind of more so like a control thing of like how can I control others to make sure they follow my boundaries. But it was kind of more so of when doing like the research and whatnot, they're like, yes, boundaries are how you hope to how you hope your relationships can look so you can feel more supported and have like the good well-being, but also it's like if you do find someone is violating your boundaries, it's not a moment to control, it's more so you may just have to shift that dynamic or even limit the contact you have with that individual.
Yes, yes. um, I did realize you highlighted that, and I think that's such an important piece as well. And also leading into the self-care afterward, um, because sometimes when people that we care about don't respect our boundaries, it can be disappointing to deal with those emotions, um, and just kind of working through those with self-care and therapy, and just other self-soothing activities.
All right. Did anybody want to add any more before we sign off? All right. Um, just checking the chat to see if there was anything that was left behind. All right. So thank you again, Julianne, for the awesome webinar. And if anyone wanted to access this, then it will be online on our YouTube. So yeah, so I'll leave us at that, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you. Have a good week, everyone. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.